Hi, everybody. Rad Mom here. Welcome back to the garden, my happy place to talk about scary things. On today's installment, we have demons. And it's brought to us by Rachel Wilson from her interview on the Renaissance of Men podcast hosted by a guy called Will Spencer. In part one, Rachel told us all about feminism's deal with the devil. And today we're going to hear her and Will's spiritual interpretation of the outcome of that historical chapter of the culture wars.
And so in order to restore that Edenic natural state, we have to return to the goddess.
That sounds nice.
Which is where you see like the psychedelic movements of the 70s and 80s coming in with Terence McKenna saying, we have to return to the goddess.
Terence McKenna thought the goddess was a mushroom from outer space. Was he even a feminist?
Just take psychedelics until all your boundaries dissolve and then, submit to the divine feminine, and then we'll have world peace.
Yeah, that sounds like men and their preoccupation with submission talking, all right.
Right. And I've written a couple of pieces that take some time to dispel this myth that women are more benevolent with power than men are, because it's completely not supported in any of the statistics we have. So when women are in charge of, say, a juvenile prison or a women's prison or any other instance where women do have something of a monopoly on force, they're every bit as much likely as men to exploit that and abuse it, if not more.
So you put women in a rough patriarchal system and we adapt to it well. But where exactly do you have more power over another person's life than with your own small children? You're not suggesting that women don't do better with this than men, because that's a pillar of complementarianism. You're suggesting it's wrong to wield power like men do. Well, maybe you should take that up with them.
It's just this anti-Christian, kind of the Abrahamic religions altogether, you could argue.
There is a strong argument to be made that Christianity is anti-woman. And yeah, every few generations, we find the wherewithal to defend ourselves.
But since I'm an Orthodox Christian, I mainly see it as this, rebellion against God the Father.
We're rebelling against the misogyny inherent in this worldview. It's hard to rebel against an ethereal force you don't believe in, because most people are not Orthodox Christian, and you're gonna have a hard time selling the rest of this without that foundational bias.
Is really what it is at the heart of it, and that's why all of the other esoteric and occultic religions are so appealing to feminists. They love this wrathful goddess revenge porn fantasy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because they believe that they're cosmic victims. That's the feminist theology.
Goddess theology does not tell women we are victims. It calls us to be more than broodmares. Tells us we have more to offer the world, to add our voice to the conversation and speak up for what we believe in. Uh-oh, Rachel. I think you might have caught it.
It's very well known statistically that women get far less punishment for the same crimes as men. And that's usually a male judge, who's going easier on the woman, because men are, I believe, inherently benevolent.
Lighter sentencing has historically been understood as a recognition of women's supposed smaller mental capacity.
I don't think they're inherently abusive or inherently oppressive. I think they're inherently benevolent for the most part. Evil exists among people of both sexes, but it's not that men are particularly prone to evil or abuse of power.
This is what I believe about most human beings, most of whom are oppressed systematically to some extent by this patriarchal system you love so much. I'm suggesting that we can do better.
It takes a lot of suspension of disbelief to think to yourself that throughout all of human history, with all the love songs and poems we have dating back to ancient times of men expressing their willingness to do anything for the woman they love, talking about their reverence for their own mothers, their love for their daughters, that really what they were doing was just waiting for their first chance to abuse some ladies. They just wake up in the morning and they're like, how can I hurt a woman today?
Well, it's worth acknowledging that abusive people usually do not see themselves that way. We're all the hero of our own story, right? However, this is not to dismiss the observation and statistics that most men are, in fact, people with feelings. I consider this a reasonable premise And I hate to admit it, but if they're not, then I'd consider the whole human experiment to be a failure.
Right? So it's just, like I said, upon just a little bit of investigation, these things fall apart very easily.
The concept of women's fundamental human rights is not contradicted by the fact that men are also human. I see no conflict there. I see reason for hope there.
But if men do it, they're just instantly dismissed and accused of misogyny.
That's true. It is easier and more relevant for women to criticize feminism. This is basically my brand at this point. You're welcome.
So I really think that, ironically, just like how they needed men to push feminism on everybody, I think it's going to take like me and at least a few other women kind of standing up and being rational enough to actually examine these ideas and their outcomes and say, it was a fun experiment, but let's not. It's time for this to end. I think we're done with this now.
Here you go again, putting yourself up as the rational one. But you know what? I'm not even going to say anything. I'm just going to go ahead and let you contradict yourself.
I think that's what it's going to take, ironically, to kind of dismantle it. And I'm hoping that's the case, because otherwise the historic pattern is you need a collapse.
That is what tends to happen when something has been hollowed out. Conservative forces love to get hold of egalitarian projects, squeeze the life out of them, before declaring them useless and we ought to throw them away. In part 1, Rachel laid out for us how this was done over the past 150 years to leftist movements on a broad scale.
So if the ideological roots are bad, if the philosophical and religious roots are bad, and the outcomes are bad, I'm not sure what the argument is in favor of pushing even more feminism.
Define bad. Because coming at this from, as you say, an Orthodox Christian perspective, you probably went in expecting demons. I cut out most of the character assassination because we get it. You don't like suffragists. But you describe how accepting dirty money tainted the movement, totally glossing over how this might explain all the modern stuff you're complaining about.
All I'm trying to do is kind of present the argument against it and say, wait, nothing is lining up here. Why are you still pushing this?
Because the basic foundational premise that women are full human beings equal to men is still true.
Like, what's the agenda?
Oh, the agenda is to kill God the Father.
The agenda is certainly not to kill or somehow dethrone the Abrahamic God, who most of us, as you may have noticed, don't believe in these days.
Right. That's the thing that I really appreciated about your book, is that you didn't whitewash the history of feminism or varnish it or say, well, they had some good points here. It's like, no, this is an occult, anti-God, anti-Christ movement, and has been from the start.
And there goes the mask of rationality. Behind all this scholarship is this pre-established theological conclusion.
It's because fundamentally this world is a spiritual battle.
I would argue that the fundamental defining quality of this world that affects all of us pretty equally is its materialness.
But like you said, it's God the Father who is the one that loves us and wants to redeem us.
Oh, that's sweet. But it's from the original sin that he gave us, right? I thought that was what Jesus died for. Whatever. I'm not opening that can of worms.
And so all the other forces fighting against that are just going to cause more decay, more suffering, more problems.
Christianity is the answer to all of our problems. Sure, I've never heard that totally rational idea before.
And that's where we are right now, especially in the West, with so many people rejecting Christianity and having like these atheist worldviews. But really, there's no such thing as atheism. Even the staunchest atheists always have some kind of other underlying worldview for how things work that tends to be spiritual, whether they want to admit it or not.
Not an atheist, but they do exist. I have personally known many. You can meet an atheist, shake their hand, and maybe even learn a little bit about what they believe and why. Unlike Sky Daddy, I have a feeling you two have never actually met.
a man kind of giving into a woman that he really is into is always his big downfall.
Right, because a man is never a woman's downfall. No woman was ever undone by love. This is almost as silly as the Heavenly Father stuff.
And I think the thing that's hard for men, that's their burden, is going to be this idea of how do we firmly but benevolently take back power and control for the most part in society. I know when women hear me say that, it causes this knee-jerk discomfort.
Yeah, I think we've isolated what it is about your message that's alienating other women, Rachel.
And I know that when I say things like submit, right, that word causes this knee-jerk discomfort, and it's conditioning.
Understanding the meaning of a word is conditioning. Right, but we're the ones that rely on propaganda. Sure.
It's
Yes.
normal. It's normal for you, if you're a woman hearing me talk this way, to have this uneasy feeling in you when you hear me say these things. But you have to decondition this impulse that men having power or having control or being in authority is inherently bad.
Bristling against submission is not saying no man should ever be in charge of anything.
That's not the sex of the person with authority is not what makes it inherently bad.
That's right. Power corrupts, remember? I've never heard a clause that says women are exempt from that.
This is the choices you guys have. It's either going to happen the hard way or the much harder way, right?
Mhm.
So either the men decide enough of this experiment, we're going to benevolently kind of take back the reins of authority as we should, or we're going to have a catastrophic collapse that will necessitate a strong man coming in and putting society back together. And that's never comfortable. That's usually pretty brutal. And that's what we will end up going back to if somebody doesn't kind of put the brakes on this soon.
This is why I really wanted to cover this interview. I see this long, overarching narrative justifying the takedown of what progress we have managed to make. And it's kind of scary, I'm not going to lie. Because pulling out a little bit further, we can see a long pattern of high and low points in women's history. Bright spots where women ran businesses and wrote books. And darker times where there is silence. This has happened before. And we cannot allow these people who are so certain in their worldview to take advantage of uncertain times.
So what I see as the wild card in all this is sexual liberation.
Sexual liberation was another masculine psyop designed to gratify male appetites by encouraging us to behave more like them. Mainly only conservatives seem to be onto this for the moment, but Will here has a fun new spin on it.
That sexual liberation was the liberation of women's sexuality from the constraints of marriage. You created all of this supply, let's say, of sex, and then that creates all of this demand.
Women's existence does not create men's sexual appetites. This is the same logic behind dressing modestly and all that victim-blaming crap.
So you have men essentially worshiping the goddess of women's sexuality, which is direct contradiction to the God the Father.
And this is what happens in a system designed to cater to male gratification? They lean towards goddess worship. I'm not sure that's how I'd characterize the porn industry. But this inclination would seem to contradict the idea that men are inherently superior and we all secretly know it. Good catch, Will.
So part of this is reining women's sexuality back in.
That would appear to be the foundational thrust of a lot of things. It's why the misogyny is a feature, not a bug. And he just came right out and said it. Sir, my sexuality is none of your business.
I wish we could all live in this cozy kindergarten world where we can tell everyone that everything's fine, everything's permissible, every life choice is equally valid, every worldview is equally valid, but that's not reality. That's not how things work.
How do you determine what it is that works, Rachel? Is it material testing and observation or consulting Bronze Age literature?
So I always say, who's really the one that cares about women?
Sadly, too often it's not women. We have been conditioned to not care about ourselves because we still get the message that we are less than men.
Is it you feminists who are telling them to do all this god-awful self-destructive stuff that also, by the way, prevents them from ever having salvation and reconciling with God.
That's true. Helping people convert to Christianity is not really a concern for people who don't believe in that stuff.
God. So I'm often really thankful that the Lord saw fit for me to be a mother when I was young, because I think it was one of the best things that could have happened to me.
And I'm glad for you that you are happy with your life choices. I wish you could see the irony of your crusade to rob the rest of us of the same satisfaction.
I never built my entire view of myself around my attractiveness or my sexuality. It was built around other things, like what I could do for the people around me, service to the people I love in my life, things of value that I could provide to the world, my intelligence, things like that. And I think that's much better for women. I think it destroys them when we do it the other way.
Sexual objectification is arguably just as bad as domestic objectification. But don't sit there and say that the school of thought that tells us not to speak in its houses of worship values our intelligence.
Let's see if people like me and all the others that we've talked about are going to be listened to, and if people will, like, what we're saying is going to sit well with people, and if they'll follow it, or if they're going to decide that more girl boss feminism, Taylor Swift and Beyonce stuff is the way to go, I guess.
Those are not our only two options, but we know the threat if we continue with our wicked quest for self-determination.
We're going to have a catastrophic collapse that will necessitate a strong man coming in.
No pressure though.
For the people who want to find out what's going on, for the people who want to find out the truth, they'll probably get here at some point.
I guess that would be why I was already aware of all of this stuff.
I just hope they find it before it's too late for them. That's why I'm trying to tailor my message to younger people to the extent that I can.
Thank goodness Gen Z are pretty savvy when it comes to spotting hypocrisy.
This movement claims to be by women for women. I've been told my whole life that I owe it to these brave feminist activists who came before me, that I couldn't do anything if it wasn't for them, which isn't true.
Well, feminism got Hedy Lamarr educated and free enough to invent the wireless technology you're using right now.
But I'm like, at the very least, if this is supposed to be for me, for my daughters, if it's supposed to be for Pearl, right? If feminism's for us, why don't we have a right to scrutinize it? Why don't we have a right to evaluate it in its totality and decide if we think it was good enough for us or not, if we think it made things better for us or not? Don't tell us that women deserve to be heard and women are important and this is all for women, and then also say you are not allowed to question it, and how dare you say anything negative about it, and don't you dare examine the outcomes of this revolution. I think that's absurd, and I think as women, we have every right to decide if feminism actually helped us or if it was detrimental to us.
I could not agree more, and that is literally the mission of this channel. Holding feminism to account, examining it to try and make it better. Because I come at all this with the assumption that women deserve to speak as much as men. All the same opportunities as men. That the reverse cannot also be true is the fundamental injustice in all of this, the elephant in the room. But women's sexuality is not yours to rein in. Only thinking you have God on your side could possibly make you miss how gut-bustingly pompous that is. Needless to say, I don't have a whole lot of patience for the argument that feminism is demonic in nature. And whether or not you believe in demons, to my mind, is actually completely beside the point. Because the foundational principle that women are full human beings is just a fact. And if your theology has a problem with that, it's wrong. Come back at the top of the hour for the live stream and discussion, where I'm sure we will have a lively debate about all things feminist spirituality. And then Friday at 11 for a brand new video. Okay, thank you so much for joining me. I'll see you then. Bye.